Hello and welcome to episode 41 of the 1001 Movies podcast, based on the book 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die. This week we'll be talking about Ernst Lubitsch's 1942 screwball comedy, To Be or Not to Be.
Oh, no, I think we've talked much too much about me. Tell me about yourself.
Well, there isn't much to tell. I just fly a bomber.
Oh, how perfectly thrilling.
I don't know about its being thrilling, but it's quite a bomber. You might not believe it, but I can drop 3 tons of dynamite in 2 minutes.
Really?
Does that interest you?
It certainly does.
I don't want to overstep myself, but I'll take a chance. Would you permit me to show you my plane?
Maybe.
When shall I call for you?
Tomorrow at 2 o'clock at my home. No, I better meet you right at the airport.
Goodbye. I hope you forgive me if I acted a little clumsy, but this is the first time I ever met an actress.
Lieutenant, this is the first time I've ever met a man who could drop 3 tons of dynamite in 2 minutes.
It's a misnomer that the influx of German filmmakers in the 1920s came about because of the rise of Nazism. Although Ernst Lubitsch was from a Jewish family in Berlin, it was the draw of making big films for big money that brought him overseas to Hollywood. Raised by a family of tailors, Lubitsch was initially a stage actor and inevitably began working on silent films, followed by musicals like The Merry Widow. He eventually eased his way into directing and producing comedies. Although Lubitsch often did not write a script himself, he worked closely with screenwriters such as Billy Wilder and Samson Raphaelson on pictures that he would direct. At the time, Hollywood had a conservative policy on what could be seen on screen, and Lubitsch became a master at depicting sexual relations off-screen, using witty dialogue filled with innuendo and clever imagery. Lubitsch became one of the best-known directors in Hollywood, and was also one of the first to have his name prominently displayed on the posters for his films, along with the names of the cast members. When a movie was marketed with having the Lubitsch touch, audiences knew that it was going to be a sophisticated comedy, usually featuring a love triangle of some kind. He was a proponent of enlisting European actors and crew members to work in American film, and 1939's Ninotchka was a beacon of the result of these efforts. There were few American names in the credits, despite it being a Hollywood picture. And, by the way, listen to episode 6 for more on that film. One of Lubitsch's closest collaborators was Hungarian Melchior Lengyel, who had helped develop the stories for movies like Ninotchka, Forbidden Paradise, and Angel. Together with Lengyel, playwright Edwin Justice Mayer hammered out the screenplay for To Be or Not to Be, the next jewel in Lubitsch's crown. Set in Warsaw during the midst of the German occupation, To Be or Not to Be centers on married stage actors Joseph and Maria Tura, played by Jack Benny and Carole Lombard. When Maria finds herself the idol of a fawning fan and member of the Polish Air Force, played by Robert Stack, Maria and Robert become embroiled in espionage, enlisting their friends and colleagues in their experiences with a folded production poking fun at Adolf Hitler. What results is a comedy in the classic screwball tradition, with mistaken identities, a love triangle, and laughs all around. Jack Benny was already a household name with his radio show, The Jack Benny Program. Carole Lombard had already solidified a name for herself as the queen of screwball comedy with movies like 20th Century and My Man Godfrey, and listen to episode 10 for more on that. Lombard was the key that Lubitsch used to getting the film made, and it was released in 1942, just after the United States became embroiled in World War II. The timing of the film's release seems fortuitous, but at the time it didn't exactly help. The jokes and jabs at Hitler and the Nazis simply came across as crude humor about mass murder. Ironically, just 2 years earlier, Charlie Chaplin had satirized Hitler with The Great Dictator, and in the same year, even the Three Stooges had their opportunity to join in the fun with their short You Nasty Spy, with Shemp Howard as a caricature of Hitler. 1942 also brought the nation Nazi-bashing movies like The Devil with Hitler and the Bob Hope hit My Favorite Blonde. Looking back at it now, it seems as if To Be or Not to Be would be a critical hit, but apparently critics were still reeling from Pearl Harbor and found it distasteful. Bosley Crowther of the New York Times wrote, "Frankly, this corner is unable to even remotely comprehend the humor. You might almost think Mr. Lubitsch had the attitude of anything for a laugh." The film was a box office flop as well as a critical failure. Jack Benny's father allegedly stormed out of the theater upon seeing his son dressed as a Nazi in the opening scene. It did garner an Academy Award nomination for Best Music, although this seems more of a slight nod than anything else, as most of the music sounds as if it was adapted from classical pieces. By 1942, Lubitsch's days were sadly numbered. He had high hopes for future projects, but after 2 heart attacks in the 1940s, he refused to allow his work and lifestyle to adapt to his failing health. He jumped immediately back into the director's chair and continued smoking cigars nonstop, which became his trademark look. All of this caught up to him in 1947 at the young age of 55, when he suffered his third and fatal heart attack. The film he was working on at the time, That Lady in Ermine, went unreleased. Even more tragic was the life of Carole Lombard, as this was her last film in a popular and nonstop career. In January of 1942, Lombard and her mother were flying from Indiana to California when the plane crashed, killing all 22 passengers on board. She died 2 months before the release of To Be or Not to Be, and, for the sake of good taste, the filmmakers cut a moment in the movie when she says the line, "What can happen on a plane?" Jack Benny, of course, had a much brighter future, and his radio show would flourish throughout the 50s, which transitioned into a great television career in the 1960s. To Be or Not to Be is probably Lubitsch's most popular film now, despite its lukewarm reception at its initial release, and was remade by Mel Brooks in 1983, although his retelling lacked some of the spike of the original. What did I think of To Be or Not to Be? In 2 words, hilariously magnificent. The fact that this film was frowned upon by critics at the time of its release only reflects its cleverness in modern times. The term screwball comedy seems to denote something negative, but almost every other line in this movie is laced with double entendre, usually with a sexual undertone, which was par for the course in films with the Lubitsch touch. The witty dialogue drifts so seamlessly within each scene, in fact, that it may take multiple viewings for the viewer to catch it all. Carole Lombard is adequate, but Jack Benny steals almost every scene he's in, playing the pompous Shakespearean actor who is undermined by his mistake in thinking his wife is having an affair with a handsome young soldier. All of the supporting cast playing the theater company's actors have their individual moments to shine. From one actor's momentary popularity after strolling in the streets of Warsaw dressed as Adolf Hitler, to the Jewish bit actor who saves the day playing the coveted part of Shylock amidst a gathering of Nazis. Everything seems to work here, and not being an overly politically correct person, I even chuckled at some of the infantile humor of Polish names in the film's opening. The film is not completely fun and games. There are brief moments of solemn tragedy, such as a scene in which German soldiers march through Warsaw, watched sadly by several Polish citizens amid the backdrop of bombed homes and shops. This brief moment doesn't pull one out of the comedy permanently, but serves as a bleak reminder that the light film we're watching shouldn't underestimate the seriousness of what was happening in Poland. Finally, props should obviously be given to Ernst Lubitsch himself, not only for his clever work on the screenplay, but his adept direction of what could be basically moving pictures of people talking in rooms. As a former stage actor, Lubitsch knew how actors should be blocked, and if you watch carefully, you can see how even during moments of exposition, Lubitsch keeps his actors moving in all points within the frame, making the film move along kinetically as well as giving it depth. Yes, this film is good, and I dare say it may be a comedic masterpiece of 1940s cinema, and still hasn't run out of steam almost 75 years later. This one is highly recommended to anyone with a modicum of a sense of humor. That's all I have to say about To Be or Not to Be. Tune in next week when we talk about Jean-Pierre Melville's Les Samurai from 1967. In the meantime, feel free to email me any questions or comments at 1001moviespodcast@gmail.com and follow me on Twitter at 1001moviespc. Until next time, happy viewing.